Hi, this is Sam McGuire. Today we're going to look at some of the musical features of Soundtrack Pro. Now, one of the great things about Soundtrack Pro, being that it's bundled with Final Cut Pro, is that if you need some instantaneous music, either a scratch or a temp track, or even something more permanent, there are a lot of different tools that are bundled with this. So you can get in here, throw together some music, and have something of what you're looking for, at least to give somebody else an idea if they're going to compose something. Or, like I said, in some cases you're going to be using this as your final, and some of that is good enough quality to do this. So to do this, we need to look at some of the basics of what Soundtrack Pro has to offer. In the left pane, get there by clicking on this button, we have our Video tab and our Project tab. This is under the default set of tabs. So just as you'd be opening it for the first time, down at the bottom of our project, we have the music area. This is where we set our overall tempo. That's how fast the music's going to play. The time signature, which in almost every case you'll leave as 4/4. This allows us to have 4 beats per measure. That's the subdivision for the music, and that's what most music is. You can often use 3/4 for things like waltzes or polkas. And then the key of it. Now the key is actually going to play an important part as we start using the content that's bundled with Soundtrack Pro. Now what we have with this are Apple loops. And let's actually go over here. This is in the right pane under the Search tab. We're going to click and drag this off and expand it a little bit. We have a few different ways to look at this data. This view here, which gives us somewhat like the Finder, where we can click through folders and then see the end results down here, or the grid. Now I prefer the grid a lot of times because it gives me more information in a nicely organized way. But once we go here, we have to go through this drop-down menu for music beds. This gives us fully completed music. We also have sound effects, which they do have a lot of sound effects here. We also have instruments, individual instruments. We also have genre-specific search engine. So rock, blues, cinematic, orchestral, descriptors. Things like dark, cheerful, distorted, electric, and then custom, where we can right-click and add anything we want from the list that they've given us. So if we want to look up symbols, choose symbols. We could also put on accordion. And so now we can search via these terms. You can't really add your own terms, but you can use the ones that are there. And the rest of these lists don't have all of them on them. So it'd be nice, once you get a feel for this, to create some of your own. So what you can do, 2 things. First of all, music beds. We can actually add fully completed tracks into your project just by clicking and now dragging them out. Once we do that, we can push play. And this could be the soundtrack for your new project. Now, you're going to be a little wary of that because if you have access to that, then every single person who has access to Soundtrack Pro could be using that same track. They're all royalty-free, which means you can use them, but you're running the risk of somebody else using them. Now, if it's temp music, that isn't such a critical thing because you could just be finding a piece of music as a placeholder and then somebody else will write something original. Down here on this one, we have mixed. This word mixed. That means these are all the completed things. One of the great things about this is we can turn that off, choose something like world, orchestral. That's actually a good one here. We have the Academy All. But also we have it split out by parts. So just the cello, just the viola, just the violin 1, violin 2, etc. And this goes on for 2,092 items here. So that is a long list of files that you have access to. So when you do this, you can then take just a piece out of this at a time. But how do you fit those pieces together? And that's what I want to spend a lot of time on now, is talking about how do we actually put these individual pieces together. Well, there's some information here which is important. We have over here the amount of channels it is. Is it stereo? And some of these, let's see if there's any surround ones. I don't see any surround in this list, but I'm scrolling through quite quickly. Let's just organize by channel. You see here we have a few at the bottom which are 6-channel surround sound. We also have tempo information. How fast is that going to be? And that relates to this. So anytime the information here, the tempo or the key, doesn't line up with the tempo and key here, it's going to be time expanded or compressed to match this tempo, and it'll be pitch shifted to match the key. So that's where some of the difficulties come in, and sometimes when you're going through these, you're going to hear some sounds that sound pretty bad. So let's actually find one of these. You can hear there's some warbling on that, and it sounds like it's too fast, and it really is. It's being time compressed from 90 beats per minute to 120 beats. So it's actually being sped up quite a bit, and it's being transposed as well. So when I'm looking for a piece of music in here and I find a loop that I think, wow, that would be really cool, but I don't really like how it sounds, or let's make that the foundation, I'll typically choose one first. And actually we could do this one here that we just had selected. Alternative Acoustic 04. Let's delete the one we have out here. And I'm going to look at this information. It's 80 or 90 as a tempo and in the key of E. So I'm going to change this to 90. Change this to E. Check this out. I'm going to play it again. Actually sounds a ton better. Drag this out, and it goes right out on there. Now, one of the things I want to do quite quickly here is change my ruler format away from time code into bars and beats, because I really want to be able to see how we're working here. So up here in the same project area under ruler units, we'll go to beats. And now you'll see this changes, and these gray lines line up perfectly with the one I dragged out. And it actually lines up in the sense. You can see 1.3, that's measure 1, and then the start of measure 2. So it ends before measure 3. And that means it is 2 measures or 2 bars long. What we can do with this now is go to the end of it. And you'll see as I get down here, when I get to the trim tool, I can copy this out and it will loop it out. And if I turn on snap, then it will actually snap to those bars as well. Okay, so that's great. We have a guitar part now. We're in the key of E. I want to find some drums and bass to go with this. So I'm going to click on bass first. And at this point, I'm not worried as much about the tempo, but I am worried about the key. So I'm going to click on the key here to sort it by key. I'm going to come down here to the E, the key of E for all of these. Now, the only way to see if these work oftentimes is to try them. So we're going to do that. We're going to pull it on and loop it out. You'll hear one of the common issues here. The bass is changing notes as it goes along, so it's not staying on the same note. It's in the key of E, as it said down in the search, but it's changing as we go, and the guitar isn't changing at the same time. And this is a classic example of one that just is not going to work for this. So we come down here, let's find a different one. Maybe one of these other edgy rock basses will work. I'm going to say no for the moment. Let's scroll down some more. And now I'm just looking for things that might look good. Pick rock bass. I think we're onto something with that one. See, right at the moment I'm doing a lot of moving around with that. That's because of the screen resolution. Typically you'd have this on a bigger screen. Wouldn't need to do that as much. That's not a big deal. So that actually kind of works. The bass is staying on one note the whole time. The guitar is still changing chords differently, but it's keeping the E as the root, which is actually not an uncommon practice with this type of music. So I think we're going to leave that for the moment. If we need to edit it a little bit more, we can. Let's now go into Drum Kit, and let's find a good solid rock kit here. You'll notice that these don't have a key. Drums aren't tuned like normal instruments, so we don't have to worry about that so much. But we will worry about tempo a little bit. I'm going to actually search for something in a slower tempo to get a little better quality. The less we have to change that, the better. Move this down. Let's expand this out. I think we can live with that. Although there's a number of other choices here, including ones that would be time compressed or expanded. So just tons of options with these. We're looking at 1,500 different percussion files, including some very cool and stylized. So now let's actually drop this tab back on here for the moment, because once you have the music you want and things are fitting together, you have some other options still. What we can do is come down here, and we can actually, in this case, remove some of these tracks. We don't need them. Now we got how many we want. And on the master area, show hide master track, we have right here this thing that says show envelopes. We can do transpose and tempo. So what this does is start in the key of E, which is our project, and it starts at 90 beats per minute, which is our tempo. So we can now add points along this and have just about anything happen. Watch as the tempo changes. So one of my favorite things about this is that we can now come in and see if we have a tempo that we really like. And if we think, wow, it'd be better if it was a little bit faster, we can simply pull this up. The equivalent of just saying, musicians, can we play a little bit faster? Now we can also, if we want to mess around with actual transposition, and that means coming through and saying at this place right here, play 4 bars as it was, and then transpose it down a half step. And you'll hear this go a little bit lower when it gets there. So now we can create a whole arrangement of anything we want just based on the transposition and even the tempo, using the exact same loops that we had already put on there. So you can do quite extreme changes. Here it doesn't sound that amazing when you take it up 7 half steps. A half step is the equivalent of a key on a keyboard, like a piano. where you go from one white note to the next, or from a white note up to one of the black notes. That's the equivalent of a half step, and so when you go up 7, it has a musical relationship, but it's quite far. And down, same thing. Sometimes you'll do this just to get an idea of how the chord progressions would sound, and so you can then pass this off to someone who's going to re-record it using the actual chords that aren't just pitch shifted up and down. But you do have the option here at least of making it sound a little better. Now, if you want to use some of these same things and really make those sound great, you'll need to use a different tool such as Logic Pro 9, which has a lot of this but has MIDI capabilities as well, which allow these to sound much better when you transpose them. And one other thought here, you'll notice that when I did that transposition, the drums didn't change pitch. Anything that doesn't have a key associated with it doesn't transpose. So the drums stayed exactly how they sounded, and it's just the bass and the guitar that changed. One of the other great things about having this kind of tool here is that we can then come in and add different effects to these tracks, which means we can actually get a more polished final sound just using Soundtrack Pro without going into anything else. For instance, we can use a nice limiter here, which is going to make these drums sound quite a bit louder. I don't think they're quite beefy enough for my taste, and so we're going to definitely push them up a little bit more. And in addition to that, let's add a little bit of edge to them as well. But I want to put the edge first, and so I'm just going to click and drag and pull that up. Overdrive. A little bit more edge and grit to them. So now you can see we can use all these audio tools in conjunction with the music tools, and that's really kind of just the beginning to all this, because there's a lot of other tempo-oriented tools which help us score these to picture, and other ways we can combine these as we go using automation and other tools up here in the actual area where the music lives. Okay, so this has been an introduction to the power of music in Soundtrack Pro. Coming up in another part, I'm preparing a tutorial on the orchestral side of Soundtrack Pro, because there's some great string samples and a great way to incorporate those all together, including some demos of more completed work. Okay, have fun with this, and if you have any questions, make sure you let me know in the comment area.